Today's talk is all about API product management and strategy. What have I learned over the years of being in the platform world? Let me start with a story. I came to the United States back in 2000, and I started my master's at UC Irvine, and under the same professor who had taught Roy Fielding. So I was reading about REST back in 2000 when in the corporate world everybody was using SOAP. And it was a very interesting journey. I was enrolled in my PhD. I went through for about 3 years till 2003. And then I dropped out because my husband decided to study. So it was a very interesting journey. But I was doing REST. And fortunately, my life has kind of meandered towards things that are more platform, that are more API, that are more REST, and everything else that comes with it. So, over the years, kind of with my experience at academics as well as my experience at work, I have simply been doing REST APIs and lots of platforms. So, with all that, obviously, there have been successes, there have been failures. So I hope, through my talk, I'm able to tell you guys a little bit more about my experiences. So this story is just PayPal. So one of the interesting things about APIs is, again, for platform product managers, you would feel that there is no UI, there are no buttons, there are no screens. And it feels a little bit overwhelming when you're starting, like, am I really doing product management if I'm doing platform product management? But it's important to know that this field has a dire need for product managers. And if you guys are working in APIs and data, don't ever feel left behind the traditional product managers who are doing end-to-end vertical development, because in this world, it's a lot about being able to understand, rationalize requirements, work across horizontally in various domains. And so at PayPal, behind every successful product at PayPal, there is an API. So either it's an API with which the merchants are integrating, or it's an API which is powering an experience of PayPal. So I work in online checkout. It's all about the PayPal button, which launches you from the buyer's perspective into the checkout journey. So that is powered by APIs, as well as the entire checkout end-to-end with the merchant integrated APIs is also part of the same journey. So external facing APIs on developer.paypal.com plus the experiences which are powered by internal APIs of PayPal. So what is it, right? What are we trying to do when we say API product management? So we are trying to, from the product perspective, trying to build something. Every product manager is building something. And we are building something which is reusable, which has a lot of understanding about data, rationalization across a lot of data. And it does not really understand the client because it's building something based on use cases. And I'll walk you through what those are as we go deeper into the slides. So why do we need API product managers, right? A typical platform product manager's journey is all about rationalization. Many different people. If you imagine you're in a situation where you have to build APIs, whether they are to be consumed by internal stakeholders or external stakeholders, you have to build APIs. So you have to work with many different departments within your company with other product managers who would come and ask you about their requirements. They'll give you their requirements, and at some point they will say, hey, the platform needs to be able to support my requirement, so for me to build my end user product. So then you will basically be bombarded with requirements from all product managers within the company. So what do? You rationalize them. And again, I'll talk a lot about that as well. Then comes design. A lot of it is also gathering feedback from developers. Now, developers are, I feel, the most honest crowd of clients that you can ever have. So, it's not like a customer who's lost. Developers is the crowd which actually knows what they're doing. And they are extremely honest about the feedback that they give you. So if you actually come from the technical background, you would really truly value the feedback that's coming from a developer, which helps you design better for your APIs. There's obviously KPIs and measurement. There cannot be any product manager out there who's not measuring the success of whatever they are launching. And there is adoption. And in PayPal, this is all targeted towards merchants, marketplaces, developers, and also internal stakeholders and users who are using certain pieces of it. So PayPal truly believes in dog fooding. So we have Braintree, we have Venmo, we have Paydiant, we have all these different companies. All of them are under the PayPal umbrella. We are all part of the PayPal umbrella, and all of them, regardless of whether it's an external facing self-service API or it is being dog-fooded by Braintree or Venmo or anybody, everybody is on the same API, regardless. If it's eBay, they are also on the same API. So the idea there is that at the end of the day, you have one simple offering, and that offering actually caters to every single kind of users that you can think. A very small, simple merchant who is just trying to integrate with your APIs just to make sure that payments happen on their websites and they can accept payments, to very, very complex use cases that probably Google's and eBay's have, where we are doing complex marketplaces like use cases and moving money that way. So a lot of variations, but the offering remains simple. So as I said, right, requirements. What I want to talk about is how do platform product managers gather requirements. Obviously, as I said, you're going to be bombarded by lots and lots of requirements. Concentrate on the data, because that's what APIs do. That's what every platform is about. At the end of the day, it's just data exchange. And thinking about data comes from various different ways. If you ask typical engineering and architecture people, they are trying to architect the system better so that we have simplified stacks, we have rationalized requirements, we have all these other things that are engineering specific and helpful. How does the product manager come in and help? Now, think about it this way, right? If I had to start building a platform, I have nothing, I have lots of data which I've collected in probably RDBMS tables or whatever else. How do I actually start building my platform offering, right? The easiest thing that companies do, which I've normally seen, is, oh, everybody's doing platforms these days. We need to do something about platforms. Maybe we'll get extra revenue. We'll have something else happening there. So let's do this. We have all this data. We'll put some API jackets on top of them and put it out there, right? There's no understanding what the market requires. There's nothing which says that due diligence has been done, right? It's a very different technical mindset of saying, hey, I have all of this data. If I had to share all of this data, what is the best way for me to do it? Let me just make some APIs and put it out there, right? But the product manager comes in, and the product manager says, hey, wait, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to put API jackets on top of your data. Yes, we have data. Yes, we want to do something purposeful. But the point is that we first need to understand what those use cases are. And based on that, we're going to mix and match our data to actually figure out what that API offering finally needs to be. And that's where I very categorically say that quit the internal out view. That's what a platform product manager first has to do. Has to understand these developers, has to understand what the company is trying to achieve, understand the use cases that your customers have, and accordingly build that gravy that is required as an API offering to the outside world. Please don't put API jackets and start throwing things out there, right? So that doesn't scale. And then you have to also think about the granularity, right? So let's say I have, the best example that I can think about is I'm ready to cook dinner. I have lots and lots of ingredients around me. So should I start talking about each and every ingredient, or should I talk about the end product, right? So the end product might be a chicken curry or something like that, which is which is the final thing you're going to eat, because if I just give you all the raw ingredients, it's not going to help you in any which way. So again, the granularity of these APIs and offerings matter, and I'll talk about that again. And then the answer is, once you have figured out the use cases on this side, maybe you have data, maybe you have no data. Typically, I have seen that companies who actually get into platform development right away are also not the right thing to do, because if you're trying to test out something simple, you don't need a platform right away. Platform is when you're ready to scale, right? At that point, you need platform product managers to come in and help you scale from where you are today, which is probably pretty successful to a point where you want to be really, really successful really quickly, right? So platform journey is typically not the starting point, but it starts somewhere, I would say, when you're 30% there. So then you actually break down every domain. Literally every single software domain can be broken down into very simple basic building blocks. And that's where your product manager comes in and has already collected all of that feedback, all of the understanding of how customers want all of this data, what is the packaging, and has rationalized across everybody else, has figured out what to build at what granularity, and then figures out what those basic building blocks are, because you have to keep it simple. If you keep it simple, then you can scale and you can grow. If you try to make it very complicated, it's not going to scale for you, it's not going to work. And that's another thing that is like a mantra for all platform product managers. Keep it very, very simple. And then at PayPal, what we did was we built something as we call the single integration platform, right? And I'm going to walk you through what that API looks like. But the idea is that when we talk about APIs, again, as I said, not just the entire offering needs to be simple, your API needs to be simple as well, so that, again, it can scale as you're building more and more use cases into it, right? So, as I said, if once you are done with all your requirements, then obviously you have to sit down with your engineers, with your other product managers, with your team to figure out what that API design needs to be. And one of the first principles of it is to try to keep it as simple as possible. So in the requirements phase itself, if you've figured out what those basic building blocks are, then you can extrapolate and come into the design phase and start building on top of it. The second thing that I've seen in API design is humanizing. Even if you're working with developers, at the end of the day, these developers are human beings. So if your product offering needs to make sense to the external world, it needs to be human. And REST is a principle that allows you to self-define all of these objects and the relationships and things like that. That is why REST is so popular. But I can name it whatever I can feel like, right? Again, be very, very careful as to how you name your APIs. One of the things that platform product managers constantly go through is the fact that once I've published something, it's very, very hard for me to change it. Because if there are integrations on it, they are not going to change. This is not a Facebook wall product manager who is changing the whole game on you, and you're like, okay, I don't really care. I don't like the wall. I'm never going to come back to Facebook. Because they control everything, right? Or you can say, okay, fine, they changed it on me, but I really like all the features that has come with it, and I'm going to work with it. In the platform product world, once you have an API that's out there and people and clients are integrated with it, there is no way that you're going to go back and change it. Because I have struggled with the fact that I have never been able to come up with an amazing value prop to say, hey, if this API is working perfectly for you and giving everything that you want, I still want you to move over and stop using it because it's 15 years old and today technology has moved over and now you have something which is REST or anything else, right? They are like, oh, no, it works for me. I'm still able to process payments. Why are you asking me to come and change it over to this new design? Why? Because you want to keep it clean on your side and engineers don't want to maintain code? Is that why you're doing it? Because I don't have the money or the investment or the resources or the time to do all of these things. So this is the most important thing for a platform product manager to understand is I'm going to iterate and take my time till I actually release my API, because once I do it, there's no going back. So please remember that, and that's why the naming, keeping it simple, the entire consistency, all these different APIs, think about them as, a jigsaw puzzle, right? You know all these pieces. What is that entire picture that you're trying to paint? Because I'm painting it for PayPal, right? Developer.paypal.com. What stays? What goes? How is your competition doing? What are they doing? What are you planning to do? How are you going to have the leg up and make sure that the kinds of features that you as PayPal are giving to the outside world is at par or even better than the others, right? So all of that work is the work of the platform product manager. There's API governance, very, very important. Then there are style guides and standards, and all of this information you can actually, you can find out a lot more about it on the web. Every company does it differently. And then, as I said, right, feedback loops. And the final and the most important thing is versioning. As I said, you cannot change, but there will be times when you will have to actually change, because as newer and newer requirements are coming in and your APIs are evolving, sometimes you have to make the tough decisions of becoming backward incompatible. And when such things happen, you have to version your APIs. So that, you have to say, okay, this clientele or number of users who are integrated with version 1 of the API are different from whoever is now going to come on the version 2 of this API. It's a very hard decision. We took it at PayPal, and there's a lot to say about it. There are pluses, there are minuses, but when it comes down to actual API consistency and cleanliness, it is sometimes a necessary evil that you have to go through to make sure that you're versioning correctly and you're deprecating whatever is the older version. Any questions so far? Yeah?
The API governance, what exactly is it? Is the product manager involved with that?
Sometimes, yes. So at PayPal, it's a separate body which actually works with making sure that APIs have maturity levels. So we have maturity level 1 all the way to maturity level 5, depending on how these objects are designed, whether your test cases are running properly, whether whether the SLAs are met, and all sorts of things are to be met for you to do those maturity levels. Other than that, they also work with specification to code generation and vice versa, and things like that, and then upgrading your specification. So like, as we all know, right, 5 years back there was no Swagger, but today it's like the standard way for you to share your and create your specifications for your API. So then this body actually works with making tools, internal tools that help us get there. So and various other things. And they also help with they don't have specific knowledge about the domains, but they come in with like specific knowledge about REST, specific knowledge about actual HTTP handshakes and things like that. So how do you actually design your errors? Are these errors consistent across all your APIs and things like that? So that's the API governance body. Some people, where there are companies where product managers are themselves doing it, and there are companies where you have separate organizations that are doing it. What I like about the fact that it's a separate organization is every product manager will come there and talk to them and try to get things done, but they have like a full view of end-to-end all the APIs within PayPal, whether they're external or internal. So they try to maintain that consistency. So as I was talking about this, I think I briefly touched upon this, but I will go over it again because I think it's a very simple principle, but it helps us understand. As I said, coming back as a product manager, what is an API offering, right? And what is the simple principle that helps you get there? As I said, take the use cases, figure out the granularity, and then figure out the intersections. So imagine I have a whole bunch of use cases. Pick anything, airlines, for example, right? I'm designing an airline platform, and I need to figure out all these different pieces that need to come together, travel and tickets and the actual airline experience itself, maybe the airport, maybe TSA. I mean, I can just go on and on about it, right? So there are a whole bunch of use cases. Travel booking is one kind of use case. The travel itself is another kind of use case. Landing is some other use case. So then you have to understand all of these use cases. Then you have to take all of those use cases and say which one of those, which bucket of those am I prioritizing, and which one it actually aligns with my business. And these are the pieces that I'm going to work on, and I'm going to start designing for them. And then you go down, as I said, into granularity in the sense how fine-grained or atomic your APIs are versus how coarse-grained your APIs are, meaning how composite. The easiest example of this is any payment can be described by 6 different things, right? Who is buying? Who are they buying it from? How much money are they paying for it? Which currency? What are they buying? That is also not that important all the time. And what is the funding instrument that they're going to use to pay for that? So at the end of the day, with 6 different attributes, you can run entire PayPal, right? This is the power of distillation and filtration to the point where you have completely isolated a simple payment and said, okay, 6 attributes defines my payment, and I can start designing the basic building block of that particular payment. Is it something that I can expose to the outside world? Maybe not. Maybe not. I need to do some value-added stuff on top of these payments to make them packageable and understood by the outside world, because not everything can be distilled into just 6 different attributes, right? 6 different attributes are like the lowest common denominator across all kinds of payments, right? But there is a lot more that needs to happen, and as I will walk you through the next slide, you will see what granularity actually means. And for me to sit down and do that exercise really helped me understand these differences of what it takes. And then once you have your granularity, then you come into intersections. How are these different objects or offerings of APIs connected with each other, right? We are probably defining a flow or a certain use case which always calls API 1, then API 2, then API 3, and then API 1 again, and that's how it ends, right? So understanding these intersections and relationships between the objects. I mean, go back to 15 years ago when we used to do ER diagrams for our tables, right? And we used to do primary keys and foreign keys. I have found myself when I'm doing API design is they're very similar. They're very similar because when you have to design a database, you are thinking of what are those tables and how am I going to scale those tables. The best part about a database is it's never exposed to the outside world, so it's good. You can keep changing what you need to do, and you can write your DB scripts and you can move them over to the new schema. Guess what? You can't do that with API offerings. That's the only difference you will have, but other than that, if you start thinking that way, at least it's the right path to take you there. So this is the strategy. Let me walk you through another story. Right, so when I joined PayPal back in 2014, I was given /payment, which was what is also there on developer.paypal.com, and asked to scale /payment. And my first question was, so /payment, right? So does that mean that all of PayPal's every use case needs to go through that? And my boss says, yes, all of PayPal's every use case needs to go through /payment. And I said, so how much traffic does it go through, like right now? He said, about 10-12% of it. And I said, okay, makes sense. Let me work on it. So for the next 2.5 years, I was working on /payment, building all of these use cases, bringing in more and more traffic, to a point where I went all the way up to 86.5% of all fulfilled transactions on /payment within PayPal. Right? The idea was, okay, take all of those legacy interfaces, hollow out all of those components, and map them over to the new /payment endpoint and interface definitions, and you're ready to go. Because regardless of whether the merchant changes or doesn't change, right? They are all going through the same engineering stack behind the scenes, because they're all going through the /payment REST API. Then I came across this, I'm like, checkout is 85 to 86% of all of our traffic. The rest of all the others are, not as much. And then once I was done with checkout, I realized, okay, now I have to make sure personal payments goes through this, retail payments go through this, and this is not going to work because those are completely different worlds. How am I going to rationalize all of them on /payment? /payment is going to bloat and become like a 250 attribute API. Right? Because, it looks amazing when engineering and architecture designs it on the paper. Guess what? because I'm a product manager, I'm not able to sell it. I have completely confused the message when somebody is looking at me from outside in and they're like, okay, yeah, I'm supposed to integrate with slash payment. What does it do? Oh, it does this and this and this, or maybe this, maybe a little bit of that. I'm not sure what it does. If there's only one API, what am I going to do, right? So look at this dilemma. As a product manager, you came in. Your job is to make sure that you build things that are sellable. People need to be convinced to come to you and integrate with you and, grow your business. You're tracking different KPIs. And how am I going to do that if I'm doing that? So again, this is another interesting thing that has happened to me in real life where I haven't been able to scale slash payment, and then I realized this is not going to work. If I'm doing checkout, I need a checkout API. And that's the journey where what we did is I said, hey, okay, let's do this. In this strategy, if I have an API for checkout, if I have APIs for subscriptions, if I have APIs for invoicing and payouts, at the end of the day, the core layer, which is the commoditized layer, is actually doing all your payment operations, authorized captures, refunds, voids. All of these payments can actually be then, all of these can work for checkout, all of these can work for subscriptions, all of these can work for invoicing. Imagine a life where I am no longer bound by a slash payment, but I am actually trying to create APIs that enable product lines, different kinds of payments. This is your API product area. This is your value added services. This is where you build your APIs which do these payment operations. But they look different. So it's easy for somebody to come in and say, okay, I have a checkout use case, so I'm going to integrate with checkout API. And I have an invoicing use case, so I'm going to integrate with invoicing APIs. Because this is pretty much the core of what I learned is, don't over-rationalize, right? Always think about, for a product offering, what makes sense? Where are these use cases? And how do I design my APIs so that they can actually help power my things and they can still work pretty independently. Like, I don't see intersections between checkout and invoicing. Maybe if they have, then they're two different solutions. Somebody loves PayPal, wants to come and integrate with invoicing as well. Yeah, why not? Go ahead, right? So it's important to understand that. And these are like horizontal APIs that help power your offering, makes it better. You should provide search, you should provide reporting. You're doing so many things with transactions, other people's money. Give them visibility into what is happening and things like that. And then obviously when you do all of that, you have back office pieces like disputes and chargebacks, and you have APIs. Now, you can come to the portal and you can get it done there, or you can integrate with these APIs. If you're a very large partner and you're running payments with various different payment providers, of which PayPal is one of them, then I'm sure you're looking for APIs to connect data from all of these payment providers into your portal, right? And in that case, it's better to work with APIs instead of, you logging into PayPal and checking what's going on there and logging in somewhere and doing things like that. So having API offerings there makes a big difference. I'm talking partners over here. These are not small merchants. This is the order API. So we created what is called the checkout order API. And the way we built it is we said, hey, as I was telling you, right, every single payment call can be rationalized into 5 or 6 different lines, right? This one doesn't say what you're buying it for, but literally you can call order API and this is going to process a payment for you, right? Five lines of code. And then you can go on and keep adding more and more pieces as your puzzle grows, as your requirement grows. And then that's how you actually scale your API. When you're talking about your APIs on your developer portal, keep in mind that make it not just like a laundry list of all the attributes that are there with definitions on them. Let people connect to your APIs. In the sense, like, write about the different use cases this API can solve for them. Imagine how like the TV commercials run, right? You connect with the commercials. They tell you something, you feel, oh yeah, I have that problem. Maybe I should have this medicine. Or something like that, right? Think about that when you're writing on your developer portal for your APIs. How are developers going to know what you're doing, right? Yes?
When you scale an API, are you talking about scaling a single API that handle bigger requirements, more throughput, that kind of thing, or a set of APIs?
Both. I'm talking of both. So when you saw the other stacked diagram, that was more from an overall offering perspective. I don't own all of those APIs. I own the checkout API, right? But it is the overall picture of your entire end-to-end offering that's on your developer portal, which completes the picture for you, right? A checkout API that cannot integrate with the search is useless. Right? So when I'm selling my product, search and disputes and everything come together and make a big nice bundle, and then we sell it to the outside world and say, hey, you want checkout, you get all of these other things as well. Right? That's what. So that's the entire product line. This is the growth of a single API. In the sense like, how do you start thinking about adding more and more attributes towards a thing that can still accomplish it in 5 lines of code or 5 attributes, and then more and more and more come as and when the cases grow more and more complex. And that's why if you go back to the principle of use cases, we had distilled those use cases and ranked them as what is the simplest use case all the way up to the most complex use case. And that had defined what granularity and how your API is going to look like. Did I answer that? Okay. Yes.
So then, based on the use case, you have a certain set of course, those fields on the left are required for any use case, but then you say, if your use case is travel, you need to have these 10 extra fields that things are required.
Yes.
And then these are the optional fields, and that will just, they have a different endpoint potentially that they hit? Or is it
no,
always
it's the same endpoint.
Okay, same endpoint.
So what you've done is, when you're providing sample code for your use cases, let's say now you have written about your most simple use case on the developer portal, about the API, right? When you hit the API reference, it's going to show you the entire thing, right? But if they go on a landing page, which talks about use cases, checkout use cases, or airline checkout use cases, the sample code that comes with it where they can play around, that will talk about the special fields that are required to capture airline requirements, right? And we have that. And we capture a completely different, like, passengers' ticket information and all of that, which is required by FAA, and we have risk and compliance and all of those pieces underneath the hoods, which are looking at all of this information to even let the payment go through or not, right? So then you can talk about, in your sample code, you can talk about those pieces or attributes which are specific to that use case. So if someone's scrolling through your landing page, they see that, they're like, yeah, I have this use case. Let me see which are the attributes which work there. Otherwise, if they're going on your reference page, they're lost. They don't know. They don't know, okay, where do I start from? I see this node, maybe this is the one that I need, right? So see, rationalizing all of these things under a single umbrella is hard, but there are ways in which you can actually work out your documentation so that they can understand and relate to it better.
Okay, and then you can validate what they're inputting based on the use case, which is another field within that.
Correct.
Okay.
The idea here is, let's say I started off as a simple merchant. I'm doing like 5 transactions a day. Right? I have something as simple as that. And then I'm growing and growing. Now imagine, I've already integrated, I've already given money to some developer to come in and build the entire plumbing so that I can start working with PayPal, right? I'm growing, I've now become a mid-sized merchant, or maybe I've become even a large merchant, like 2-3 years down the line, I'm doing really, really well. Lululemon is a good example, right? I'm sure when they started off, they weren't that big, but they're pretty big now. So then, all I'm doing is I'm not really changing my integration, I'm just integrating with more and more fields because my use cases are growing. So I haven't changed the plumbing. All I have done is I have started providing more and collecting more and more data and providing more and more data to PayPal for me to process that specific kind of payment. So if you think that way, then the API is actually growing with you as your business is growing, right? You haven't really moved out of checkout, but you have more and more use cases in checkout that are applicable to you.
So what are some indicators then that your API is bloated to the point where performance, usability, ease of usability start failing?
From my experience, I think it was bloated when all the product lines were supposed to go through it, through /payment. That was too bloated because I could not rationalize a payment that was going through a terminal into my online checkout use case. It was just not fitting in, right? Yes, there was a financial instrument. Yes, there was a buyer. Yes, there is a merchant. But it's just chalk and cheese, right?
So as a product person, then what are some of what's in your toolkit to deal with that?
Yeah, so as I said, right, going back to the strategy slide, retail checkout has a separate API stack. Online checkout has a separate API stack. So at a certain point, you have to rationalize and figure out what is it. Is it a product line, a different line of business that this API is powering? Or is it the same business, but is it all online checkout, but different complexity within it, right? So you have to answer that question first. So if it's completely different lines of business, don't try to rationalize them into a single API. If it's the same business, but there's airlines, there's credit, there's whole sorts of other things that can happen within the online checkout process itself, build it all into the API, right? It will not go any beyond, I would say, 35, 40, 45 fields, right? But it's not going to be 250 ever, right? So I think the user's perception is best understood when you talk to them. Talk to them to understand this granularity of how your API offering is going to look like, because do you have to build a single API for all of PayPal, or do you have to build 4 or 5 core APIs that are going to power these product lines? And within each of those, understand what granularity is required from them. So I think talking to developers really helped there and helped us build the right thing.
And what if we didn't realize all the use cases at the beginning, but later we realized that there is a use case that is very valid to a particular customer? And then do we version that after?
Depends on whether it's compatible or not. Can you expand your API to include that use case? Or is it asking you to modify your existing attributes?
Okay.
So it's all a question of compatibility. So within PayPal as well, what we do is we don't highlight every field to developer.paypal.com, right? There are 3 main buckets, right? One is all your public-facing errors, public-facing attributes, their definitions, and things like that. Then there is a limited release bucket, which is used by, those are partner attributes, partner errors, partner things, which are used by very large partners. And they have sort of a custom integration, but not too custom, because I stay away from custom. I've been burnt by it when I was integrating eBay. So stay away from it. So then there's a whole limited release bucket, which is typically catered towards all partners. And then we have an internal bucket, errors that are never ever going to get highlighted to the outside world, even to your partners. It's something that PayPal is themselves, applications are looking for those errors to know, oh, do I need to redirect, get another, whatever, if it's a risk error or whatever else it is, right? So 3 different categories. So when you're thinking about expanding an API, start thinking that way. What are my internal fields that I don't need to expose, but I'm dogfooding my own API? That's very important, right? Don't have an internal offering versus an external offering. Literally, make sure everybody comes under the same one. That's how you harden your stuff. Reuse. When I say I'm like to the dot reuse, where like I am myself using my own APIs to make sure that they are, state of the art, they are fine. Helps maintain code better as well from the engineering perspective, right? Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, internal and public and limited release. And then you keep adding fields accordingly. At any point, if you feel that you're becoming backward incompatible, and I can give you an example. So what we did is the amount field in the V1 orders is not very, I wouldn't say it was very self-descriptive. At one point, we really had to make a very hard decision and say, we're changing the definition of amount. Can you imagine changing the definition of amount on APIs in PayPal? That literally, like every API is going to get hurt, right? So, very tough decision, but we had to take it because our API governance body was saying that it needs to have a very simple common object definition that can be utilized across various APIs. So we had to actually take things like that and version it to V2 because V1 amount was different than V2 amount. Like even if it's like V1 order, the amount object is different than the V2 order amount object. So you have to make those decisions. Don't do it often. It doesn't work well. Okay, while we did all of this, there was a need we realized where we wanted to come up with a framework for launching APIs. Because this is the most, I feel like this is the best part of a product manager's job, right? You've built something, now you need to market it, right? There's a whole bunch of things you have to do. You have to figure out who is interested, who are the interested parties, how are you going to run pilots, which countries you're going to run your pilots in, if you're a global company. A whole bunch of other things. How is your specification? How are you going to, can they download these specifications? Do you send them to GitHub? What is going on, right? So there's a whole tie-in that you have to do as a product manager, and it's a really interesting journey. And not every API actually gets to see this stage, because not everything that every product manager is building goes up on the portal. So then came up, I was part of a committee which actually sat down and came up with some of these things which help define what should be a framework, or maybe a list of criteria that helps you say, okay, my API is now ready to see the light of the day or be exposed externally. So we ran a lot of pilots. We did some partner integrations. We had to convince partners to come on APIs which are not yet public, which is a tough sell. But we had to do that. Again, all of this to just harden our APIs. Then coming up with what are your specifications, where do you have Postman scripts, integration guides, do you train, so within PayPal we have professional services teams, we have other teams that actually become the champions for your APIs, because they are the ones who are integrating day in and day out for larger, this is the white gloved service, imagine, which helps integrate PayPal for customers. Work with them, listen to them, build using their knowledge, because literally they are on the field capturing a lot of information. It's good to understand them. So then training them on these new solutions is also important. Work with them, and then obviously product FAQ, you need data sheet which talks about your SLAs. You can even have videos, you can have think about what is it, how is your developer portal going to look like. There is a theory which says, and it's getting more and more popular, is once you have figured out what is the API that you're going to expose outside, start writing about it. Document it first. Do not need to build a single line of code. Don't give it to your engineer. Try to write it. Does it make sense? If it doesn't, don't build it. And I think this is actually, I've tried it myself, it works pretty well. It works pretty well. It's a hard exercise to do, but again, a small nugget of information that might help you guys as you start getting into this world is the define first, document it first, and then build it thing. And a lot of product managers, the traditional product managers who write wireframes and all of these things are also going through similar journeys. And that's the journey that we have to go on our side as well. And then obviously there are marketing teams and everybody else. There's stuff that's going on for launches. Work with them to get it out. This is the exciting piece, which all product managers love it, whether they are on the platform side or traditional product managers. This is seeing the light of the day. For me, it was on 7th of February this year. So it was a very exciting ride to get to something that we've been working on for almost 2 years now. So, and again, it was live already, but for a year it went through pilots and hardening and SLAs and all of these things to a point where all the I's were dotted and all the T's were crossed, and we decided to launch it. So it's been an exciting ride there. Okay, this is the piece that I also wanted to say. If you build an API and you put it out there, right, no one's going to come. Really, no one's. So as the launch framework is also helpful with marketing messaging and developer portal and all of these things, keep in mind that to make an API successful, there's an API ecosystem that works around it, right? This can have testing, negative testing. This can have sandbox where developers can come in and start playing around with their APIs. They need a playground to come and test out your APIs. So give it to them. An API offering which does not come with the sandbox is just halfway there. Doesn't make sense. SDKs. A lot of people like to work with SDKs. Nowadays with all this mobile development, there's Android SDKs, there's so many different kinds of SDKs, iPhone SDKs. So iOS Make sure that you provide the SDKs in different languages, server-side SDKs, client-side SDKs, whatever SDKs are required, just to give that option of integrations as well. Debugging, monitoring, these you can build within the sandbox itself, but give them ways and tools and visibility when they are integrating with your APIs so that they can feel that their integration is successful or not. Within PayPal, what we have built is called the REST flow logs. So what it does is it tracks your call from the very first call of the identity call. Identity is usually the very first door you open. No matter which integration you're doing, wherever you're doing, identity is literally the first door you have to open. And then you actually come and start integrating with your product APIs. So they provide visibility. This flow logs, meaning the flow of API calls, can be graphically shown and helps debug better when you're looking at the changes of object state. As you're calling more and more APIs, the state of the object is getting updated, changed. If it's introducing newer objects, whatever you're doing helps. Provide this kind of visibility. Start thinking as a product manager, what is it, that tool that's going to make my API successful. Notifications. Literally, this is the core of integration experience. The webhooks that you send, that's gives them information about the state of your object. They called an API. Yes, it was not a GET, it was a POST or a PUT or something like that. A notification should go out telling them that, okay, this is the state of the object that I understand as of now. Or a refund API they called, and you send them a webhook which says, okay, refunds have been processed. Whatever you need to do, whatever is for us it's the transaction which is going through states after states after state. Sometimes transactions go into pending because some hold has happened, something has happened, webhooks need to go out, right? To let them know that it's not really a successful transaction yet, you're waiting for collecting more information to get there.
Do you use any API management tools or
No. So we don't. I would highly suggest if you're if you're just getting into it, pick an API management thing that works for you. You can try the WSO2, you can try Apogee, you can try any one of these API management things that can help you grow. And then for us, it's all homegrown. It's all built internally. But yeah, if you don't want to invest all of that money into the ecosystem as a product manager, because this is tons and tons of work, right? I would suggest going that route. Depends on what maturity you are at, right? At what scale you need to work. PayPal's entire business runs on APIs, so it's important for us to build these things in-house.
And those maturity levels, are there industry standards or is it?
I've heard different things about it. I've heard that PayPal's maturity levels have been actually adopted by many different companies. Again, I don't have any validation for it, but yeah, we have these maturity levels, and I'll be happy to share them if anybody requires it. So I would like to cover a little bit about the lessons. This is the final slide, so I just want to talk about some of the things that I've learned, right? So of all the different things I walked you through, what is important, what is not. Treat APIs as products. I don't think I need to tell you this is product school. I'm talking about APIs. We all think that APIs are products. Understand customer needs first. That's where the product manager comes in. Central to understanding the pulse of what is required. Work from a minimal API structure that can grow over time. Make your default design least constrained. As you're building validations, right? Build validations towards as and when your product is maturing, you're figuring out different use cases, start building validations. Towards the beginning, just leave constraints away, right? Don't build constraints, because it's just hard to scale, because now you've built a constraint, you cannot go back and change it, and it's just, imagine again, go back to the table design, right? Don't start defining keys for every single column that you can think of, right? Just the basic ones. Don't go beyond that. APIs have experience too. I cannot talk about this enough. I think over the years, what I realized is people say, oh yeah, you guys do platforms. You have no UI. You have no sense of what a UI is. What is a flat design? What is a responsive design? I'm like, yeah, that's true, but we have experience too. And I want you guys to actually walk away with this one thing, is we have experience. Our experience is called the integration experience. Someone needs to come and start integrating with these APIs to consume the data or push data towards us to get a task accomplished, right? So there's a whole experience of actually connecting with these APIs and making your product successful and getting it adopted. And that's called the integration experience. So next time someone stops you, you tell them, no, we have experience too. Versioning and deprecation, very, very important. Again, depends on how mature your company is. If it's the very first offering, don't need to think about versioning and deprecation right away, but at some point you should have a clear deprecation strategy. Different companies do it differently. I mean, you see Google and Facebook doing one different thing, Stripe is doing something different, PayPal is doing something different. Try to make it as consistent as possible, see what the industry is doing and what is comfortable from your perspective. I have killed APIs. So I know it's hard, it's a risky decision sometimes, but if that's what you feel keeps it simple and easy to understand at the end of the day, go for it. Go for it because it's worth it. And I mean, today only we heard, right, there was some product that I even didn't know that Google had, which was called Google Inbox, and they killed it yesterday or something like that. And I was like, oh, it existed, huh? I never moved out of Gmail. So I don't know what this is. So they do it all the time. Big companies, you know, they make these hard decisions. I have, PayPal had a very popular product that was built in 2009 called Adaptive Payments. Amazing product, was doing really well. It could do a lot of complex payments from primary receivers, secondary receivers, payouts, all sorts of complex flow-based payments where they're multi-leg. Very popular product, but it wasn't built well. And it needed to go. And it needed to get built into our existing product line. So what we did is we said, okay, let's understand this capability, let's figure out what are the capabilities that set. And then we are going to build those kinds of product pieces or payments pieces into our existing product lines, and we're going to let that product deprecate. And we did that. We literally took away all of those. There was a way in which clients could come in and ask for an application, and then it needed to go through vetting and all of these different kinds of things before the client key was provided to them. So we had to employ people to get all of those things done. Now when the product got deprecated, none of that was required. Those people were now free to do other things. So it's hard for you to do that, but you have to sometimes make these calls. And as product managers, you know your product the best. Figure out what you're striving for. Yeah.
How much time do you usually provide between the deprecation announcement and end of life?
About a year and a half, 18 months. That's what we try to do. End of life hasn't happened much. Other than killing adaptive payment APIs, and again, those APIs, people who are still connected to it and transacting on it, it still works. What we have stopped is any net new integrations by removing all documentation, by removing all the APIs, by removing everything, so that we don't expect. But if someone who has integrated with it back in 2009, 10, and it's still running, it just works. Okay, guys, questions? Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about the PayPal strategy of REST API versus GRPC, and also about competition with Alipay and Stripe and based on APIs?
Yes. So that's a method of data transport, right? GRPC, which is the Google RPC. Yeah. We are right now dabbling in GraphQL. And we are looking at different other ways in which we can get it. Can they coexist? Can REST and GraphQL coexist? I think they totally can, because they are serving two different needs at the same time. You can have a REST layer and you can still build like an intelligent GraphQL layer on top of it. GRPC is what we use, like protobufs, GRPCs, all those kinds of things are used internally. So behind the external facing APIs, we also have layers and layers of other platform components and things like that, which is where we use like Kafka queues, GRPC, all sorts of different other kinds of mechanisms in which we interact with our internal APIs. Those are APIs that will never ever be exposed. Those are like our platform APIs. and we use those mechanisms there. External facing GRPC, no. But you'll see GraphQL. We are working in GraphQL, and that's going to hit it pretty soon. Yes?
So, what would you suggest for small companies? Say, even for me, running a dev instance costs me a lot because I'm very small. So, how can I still, what set of minimum offering I can give and still be successful? Because over the time I'll be growing, but right now I do not have enough money to support all what you are offering right now.
Right. So, somebody suggested going with an API management, you were saying, right? So, think about using I think it's WSO2 or one of the, I'm not here to talk about any, because I'm not affiliated with any of these companies. I'm just generally giving you information. Work with some open source API management piece, which will cover most of your ecosystem requirements, right? It does all the rate limiting, the security, the performance pieces, a whole bunch of other things that are required to make sure that your platform is working properly, right? So then you can go with one of these API management companies. That's going to give you the framework. Then as a product manager, you have to, when you have to distill and figure out what that product offering is, I'm guessing you have to take your domain and you have to understand all the basic building blocks and some of the core use cases. I would say collect all the use cases and then prioritize them and say, okay, today I can only achieve, my MVP is only this much. The rest of it can come later. So, but you know that there is a rest. Right? That is another thing that a platform product manager has to do. That they have to think like 5-6 steps ahead of what can come, right? And you're going in the right direction, because if you've thought about it and have a mental model of, okay, for that particular use case, I probably need to introduce these attributes and I can fit them here. I don't need to build them. I don't need to define them today. But I know that when it comes, this is where it's going to go, right? So out of, let's say you have 10 use cases, you're building only 3, but the 7, you have a general idea of where it will fit in, right? You try that way, right? And then you can say, okay, now I have to probably go back to the drawing board and figure out for the 3, if I build 3 APIs or 2 APIs or even a single API to do all of these things. When these requirements come in, right? At that time I know either I'm going to expand my API offering or I'm going to build them into my existing APIs as optional pieces. Yes.
As a product manager, do you have like scrums that you're involved with that the application people might do, or is it?
Yes, so the team has product managers. Each product manager works with a scrum of engineering, scrum team, and we have sprints, 2-week sprints, and they just pick use cases. And again, we prioritize use cases based on how we want to get there. As I said, like least constraint. You build the least constraint, then you start adding more and more pieces to it.
So you have stories as use cases as stories, effectively.
Oh, no. No. Well, then it will not be done in 2 weeks. Usually platform development takes longer, right? So we take each of these use cases and refine them further into like smaller units of work which can be finished per sprint. And then maybe we'll have like 5 or 6 of those stories and then we'll start working on them. And then I've also like to, kind of horizontally in the product roadmap, think about having like horizontal chevrons which are working across metrics, instrumentation, performance, security, because those pieces constantly keep knocking on your door. One of the good things that I've realized is, as a platform product manager, I always have a dedicated chevron which always talks about something or the other in any of these lines which are geared towards, I would call it platform health. Make something which says platform health and visibility, which will have everything and anything. It's like a bucket which will have, otherwise you have like single chevrons of each one of them categorically called out, because every sprint I will see something or the other from these platform health pieces which are important for us to drive our platform success.
So would you wait until the API is completely developed in terms of health? Only then would you release it, or would you take a certain stage of, let's say it is...
No, you can do alpha, beta, where it's known pretty well. If you've clearly communicated as a product manager that this is an alpha release or a beta release, we are still collecting feedback. Clients are actually, developers are very friendly that way. They understand that. And they'll come and they'll integrate and they'll give you feedback.
So that would be the sandbox, or are you saying the actual API?
Well, the actual API, it can be live, but it's in alpha,
Okay.
right? Yes. We have a limited release URL and we put everything under that. And then we share it based on whoever is So if you have already identified like a small group of developers who are going to help you out, or a small clientele, like I work with professional services, they have figured out, in North America I have 5 businesses who are ready to jump in. In EMEA I have 6 businesses who want to do this. So they are going to be working with them to integrate. The API definition needs to be live, the API needs to be live, everything needs to be live, right? So then we do all of that, and then finally the launch will move it over to the actual live URL. Yes?
It's about balancing idealism versus reality. So I think he asked the question, as a small company's product manager, how do you move? As a big company's product manager, how do you balance following every item of the checklist versus following a competitor, making sure you get the market share? Like for example, Stripe in its early days probably moved much faster than you. So how do you balance checking every item in the checklist, which could take you a significant amount of time, versus trying to move into the market sooner because of some competitor?
Right. So it's a good question. Depends on what it is, right? Sometimes, so you probably recently saw that Instagram is powering checkout using PayPal, right? So this is like the #1 use case that needs to get solved. Right? You pretty much drop everything, and you have a client like Instagram, you have to just work with it, right? So you do that. So sometimes your clients who are interested with you are so big, or people who are like who come to integrate with your APIs, they are driving your roadmap, right? Shouldn't always be the case, but they make you move faster because they need something that's very, very important. So you can be not very competitor focused, but very client focused, in the sense that I'm doing something, right? When PayPal was part of eBay, eBay was king. We had to do everything that eBay wanted, right? Every single miniature piece that was required in the APIs, we built it for them. And then we're like, guess what? This is so eBay API that I can't even expose it outside, right? So we do things like that all the time, right? So either I have typically seen that for PayPal at least, client integrations and making sure that your customer is happy is very, very important. You do have a fairly good idea where your competition is going, but that's just, it's there, right? There is no question of, do I need to trump my competition? At least I have not come across that. I mean, I'm sure for a smaller company that is important, right? For us, we are the leaders, and I just have to make sure that we stay that way. I don't know if I'm making a right answer for your question, but there's an awareness of what your competitor is doing, and there is another one in which you're trying to play a catch-up game. For us, it's the awareness, not the catch-up game.
I think specifically instead of going the client side, I was thinking like subscriptions is like the new hot thing.
Yes.
And it's been around maybe for like a couple of years. It's been like really popular. So when you as PayPal design a subscriptions offering, do you follow like the 2-year checklist against say a company like Stripe, which can probably roll out a subscription offering in a month? That's
yes, we do. We have a reputation to keep. So we have a V1 subscriptions, and we are working on a V2 subscriptions as well. As you said, you rightfully pointed it out. We have our own product roadmap. Things that matter to PayPal, right? Being global. I'm researching, I'm building an API, I'm putting it out on the developer portal. I cannot put like a disclaimer over there which says, sorry, if you're in UK, you cannot integrate with this. I have to make sure that if I am operating in 200 countries, this product should work everywhere before I actually go to public. So that's a huge effort in itself. Sometimes we do that. Sometimes we say, no, only this country, then this country, then this country, depending on how, there's support for currencies and things like that. There's a whole bunch of things that we have to do, right? As product managers, you can map it out. But it's important for you to have at least some visibility into what is it that the product offering needs to be, right? And that's why I said, if you think about the API being live, somebody was asking me, right? The API was live in late 2017, early 2018. but it actually hit launch in February 2019. For more than a year, we were simply hardening, fixing, figuring out SLAs, health, everything else. Large partners, Google came on it, Facebook came on it. So we were doing a lot of different kinds of work just to make sure that it should be good enough for it to go hit. So as a product manager, if you're in a smaller company, that is mostly driven by these large asks that are coming. Feel the market. That will help you make the right decision with your roadmap.
How do you design throttling of the APIs? What do you think about when you do throttling? And then the other question is, how do you think about pricing the APIs? What do you consider, let's say?
Okay, throttling, frankly speaking, I don't work on the throttling piece. If you are using an API management software that's easily configurable, you can throttle. Keep in mind you have to throttle not just live but also sandbox, because somebody can come and kill your sandbox. Sandbox is literally like another live environment, right? If you think about it. Throttling is typically managed by our what is called the API facade layer. I haven't drawn it out there, but in the engineering architecture, there's a separate component which takes care of all of those pieces, which in your case can come from, as I said, any API management tool that you pick. Coming to pricing, very interesting question. We don't have a revenue model that runs on API calls. Right, our pricing comes from per transaction, which is very, very open and clearly mentioned everywhere, right? So we have a different model for making money. But I am very aware of having a platform offering where people connecting to the API are supposed to pay, right? So if I'm making 10,000 calls, I'm going to be in this tier, or I'm going to be in this tier. Maybe I have something really valuable that I'm sharing. Pick, what was it? I think Zillow's API that gives you the information on the estimated price of the house as well as the rent that you can collect on the house. Some of their calculations. There is an API out there like that, which is per usage based. So I know there are ones. I know there is a whole bunch of things that you can do. Unfortunately, I am not in a role where I work with pricing of APIs per se. We work with pricing mainly when we are introducing things like, we are going to now do card processing, which is different than PayPal's branded processing. Card processing is probably going to be cheaper because I'm not going to give buyer protection or seller protection. I'm not going to do all of these other things that I do when the user is aware that it's PayPal versus when the user is just using PayPal because the merchant decided to use PayPal as a gateway, right? So then, two different kinds of payment processing, where it's PayPal branded, where nobody knows it's PayPal. Both of them, one is cheaper, one is more expensive, right? You can do all of these kinds of pricing. Again, per transaction pricing, but the transaction pricing are different. But in your API world as well, then I think usage-based, metrics-based, data-based. Sometimes, the amount of data that they're fetching can also be priced. Like, are you fetching 50 gigabytes of data or 100 gigabytes of data? There are different pricing and tiering models over there. I don't know much, sorry.
No worries.
This might not be valid for but what are your selling point of API? If you are selling your API, what are the things you can show or tell them, like, okay, here are the ways you use our API rather than going to a customer, company?
You basically want a value proposition, right? What is my unique value proposition, right? So that is a central case you have to fight regardless of what product manager you are. You first need to be convinced and believe in the product that you have, right? And then only you can go and convince your customers. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. You don't believe in it, you can't sell it. I would say the first phase where you were collecting requirements and you were trying to find out more about your customers and their data needs, right? That was the central essence when you captured what is it that's going to sell. Because if I build for this particular problem, then my solution is going to sell, right? Then that is your value prop. Is it something, then when you're doing those questionnaires and collecting information from your customers, try to understand why they're not going to the competitor. Or even if they are integrated with the competitor, what are some of the problems that they are facing that they would like to see go away, right? And that's how you tackle it, and that's how you build it, and that sort of becomes your value proposition, because you figured out that gap or the hole, right, where you felt like, okay, I can go in here, put an API or something, an API offering or a platform offering, and solve that specific problem and become like the glue, right? So you can do different things. You can pretty much redundantly build the entire thing that your competitor is building, or you can find the hole and you can think of plugging that hole. You can do all of these things, because at the end of the day, API is just data, right? So you can become like a satellite offering of a main offering, right? Like imagine like there's TurboTax, right? And then if there are other pieces like personal software, personal finance, all of those things, if they're not all part of Intuit, if you are writing that personal finance piece, you can say, oh, okay, I kind of plug in here. You take TurboTax from Intuit and you buy this piece from me, right? So those are the things that as a product manager, you have to figure that out. Where are those gaps? Where are those holes? What are those issues? What are the problems? And then accordingly build a bullet point of those value props. See if it makes sense. Show it to them. Like, are you convinced this is the right thing? Should I then go ahead and build? Don't build right away. I think spend some time figuring out what those needs are. And understand the pulse of what it is. Yes?
In one of the earlier slides, you said you use data to sort of drive how you design the APIs, if I understood. Right. I think it's slide 2. Maybe
I did not cover this. That was about API innovation.
in previous slide.
Here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you sort of said, I think, use data to drive kind of the requirements of how you design API.
No, understand the implication of requirements into data. I said the reverse. Yes, use data, that's metrics. That's covered here. Here, see? KPIs and measurement, right? This data, this one is talking about collecting, basically taking requirements and mapping them to what your data should look like. Instead of saying I have data and putting API jackets on them, right? That's not how you look at it. So that was what it was. Coming to KPIs, I have seen that when you're in the platform world, I typically break them down into 3 large buckets. One is all your technical KPIs, right? My performance, my health, heartbeat, SLAs, requests per second, how am I scaling, am I available all the time, availability, different zones of availability, everything, all technical stuff that a platform should always have. Then I have what I call the business metrics, adoption, right, conversion. If my API is erroring out, a payment is not going through, right, that is conversion. Something happened and I wasn't able to fulfill the payment. So there can be APIs to actually onboard users, which is acquisition. You can do all of these business-based API things. Like today I have these many clients on my API, tomorrow I have that many, that is my client growth. You can do whatever you need, your adoption pieces and everything else. If you have metrics-based APIs, like someone was asking, then you can check how much money your APIs are making. Those are your business KPIs. And finally, you should have operational APIs, which is like, oh, somebody didn't understand something on the API, they are calling somebody, there's something else going on. There's a whole bunch of service pieces, operational pieces also. Start thinking about those as well and seeing whether, there's feedback coming from there that you can help make your APIs better so that you can reduce operational KPIs. Because that's also money, right? Every time someone picks up a phone, it takes money to do that. Time. Make sense?
So there are a lot of references on the web with regards to API design, even to very tactical decisions. What are some references that you found to be useful as it relates to API design?
There used to be a REST design book by O'Reilly. many years ago, and I used to have an ebook of that REST design book. Very interestingly talked about, very concise and nice. I would suggest going back to that book. I'm not asking you to read Roy Fielding's thesis. It's dense. You will not get it. Or you will get it, but it's not probably that important for a product manager. So from design principles, I think a lot of it is experience and skill, and again figuring out the entire strategy of your offering. If you figured that piece out, most of everything else will kind of fall into place automatically. And then reading some simple, REST. If you figured REST is the way in which you want to do this, then reading some books on, REST design will help. And the interesting piece is, regardless of whichever domain you are, right? Today you are in payments, tomorrow you are in digital advertising, then you are in, AR, VR, machine learning, whatever else you're doing, right? Maybe you're building games or user-generated content, Twitter, Facebook, whatever, right? The principles that you learn in one domain, you can totally port them over and put them somewhere else, right? You will see a trend in which a lot of these enterprise companies, cloud software companies, pick Google Cloud or Amazon AWS or anybody, they also have APIs, tons and tons of APIs, right? Their client is very different, maybe an IT administrator, a system administrator, somebody else, right? It's not like a merchant or a marketplace or somebody, but the principles that you've learned in consumer platforms, you can literally take them and apply them in enterprise platforms, and vice versa. Because platforms are platforms. It's just exchange of data. So a lot of it, as I was saying, is skills and experience that you've learned on the job that will give you the gut feeling of whether you're going in. And then this is not a right answer, maybe it's not very specific, but at least that's what I have seen that has helped me design better over time.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, for every single decision you make, there's trade-offs, there's pros, cons, there's multiple alternatives. So
yes,
I haven't found a single place to say, hey, okay, use nesting in an API for different use cases versus the approach that you had outlined in one of the slides, which is one endpoint with your different options by use case, right?
Correct, right.
And so there's pros and cons, and
yes.
So I don't know.
Talk to developers.
Yeah.
Talk to developers.
Yeah.
When you are in those dilemmas,
yeah,
find people who will come and give you help or
Sure.
give you very honest, critical feedback or whatever constructive feedback on how your API is going to look like. Talk to them. And
Sure.
then collect that information. For every product manager, that developer toolkit is the best thing that you ever have. Go back to them, knock on their doors. They're usually very happy to come and tell you what they think about it. If you're stuck.
Sure.
To that. For me, I was actually very lucky because in PayPal we have this huge professional services teams. They are all over the world. They're in Singapore, they're in London, Paris, Ireland, Brazil, and North America. They're everywhere, right? I just go talk to them. I go talk to them because they know my API is the best. And what had happened is when that slash payment was getting built, nobody talked to them. They just built something. They threw it out there and they said, hey, go integrate, right? And they were burnt. They're like, okay, this is not ready. It's not even at functional parity. What is it? I don't like this, and I'm not going to do REST. They still call slash payment REST, and they call REST an order API. I'm like, no. Both of them are REST APIs. Like, they still call it that way because they were burnt by it, right? So, in fact, when I was given the job, I didn't start at ground zero. I started ground negative. Right? Because, it's very difficult. You're given somewhere where, you have a wall of people who don't believe in whatever you are building, right? So it's a very hard task to go work with them. So then I said, okay, no. If I have to build the checkout API, I need to listen to what these guys are saying. Why have they been burnt? What is it that they're looking for? They integrate APIs day in and day out. That is their bread and butter. That's how they earn their money. So I went all over the world. I talked to a lot of these people. Figured out, came back, distilled. Then what happened was magic. Because then, over the world, I had an island of people who became my champions. Because they were like, oh, she listens. This is a product manager who wants to build an API after listening to the pain that we're having every single day with PayPal APIs. And it was like, okay, they became my champions. They're like, okay, tell me where I need to go talk about the order API. Because now my integration time is down from 3 weeks to 2 days. Right? Because so easy, because I know what the pain points, you address them, I have an API that I can use. So for someone who doesn't have the luxury of a professional services team within the company who is going to help sell these APIs or integrate, I would suggest just go directly talk to developers.
Yeah, I was going to say that rather than developers, talk to professional services because they are the customer facing and they'll give you more feedback as to what the customers really need. And that's a very good feedback in terms of even product improvements as well.
Yes.
And related to that, I have another question, which is, let's say you build the API, but how do you support when third parties start developing or using your APIs? How do you support debug and tracing to them? Because you will not give access to your servers or log files.
Yes, and that's why if you look, I had said within the API ecosystem, as a product manager, these are the places which have UIs. This page. So if you see this, you can make this a graphical tool, which is what it is in PayPal. Like it's like a graphical tool. We have in Sandbox, we have notifications coming in, which you can look, oh, what are the different notifications, which all the webhooks that come back to me when I'm doing a Sandbox integration. So the mix of, where is Sandbox? Sandbox, negative testing, all of these things combined together give the visibility to the developer who is integrating with your APIs. So this is the piece. You can build a visual tool over there. Sandbox is the whole visual experience for a developer, but it's a lot of work. I want to make sure that you guys are signing up for it right away. Or maybe these API management tools give them. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I haven't ever checked or gone deeper into the API management tools to give you an answer. But it's important to understand that these things make the API successful.